have a lesson on this study number 21 from Fernando Sor's Op.60. And if you already have the music, just follow the lesson for free. But if you're interested, I do have an edition of all 25 etudes or studies in Fernando Sor's Op.60, and there's a link for that in the description. This etude is largely about controlling the musical texture. So sometimes muting the strings on rests, and other times sustaining for maximum legato. And the more that you can separate those two things, the better off you'll be, and the more skills you'll build up from a pedagogical standpoint. So this is an interesting piece in that if you don't observe the rests in this piece, the work is fairly straightforward and fairly simple. So the grade levels would be like early intermediate, except, there's some upper position stuff, but it's generally quite easy. However, if you do observe the rests, which I think is the point of the particular study here, then it becomes much more difficult because in general, observing those rests just means lifting your left hand off the chord until there's an open string, and there's plenty of open strings. And so we have to sometimes mute those open strings in any way that we can, which becomes a much more advanced technique. So what I'll say is that if you are learning this piece and you're more on the early intermediate side, you might just want to learn the piece first and then afterwards approach the rests. But if you're firmly in the intermediate or late intermediate, then definitely observe the rests as a pedagogical study. So let's talk about how to accomplish these rests. And the first thing I'm going to recommend is that you isolate each dotted quarter note beat and just practice doing it until your left hand has the muscle memory to do it without you having to micromanage it or think too much. Because as soon as you start trying to micromanage this piece, it becomes quite taxing. And if you go to record it, like when I was recording it just then, it's really tough because sometimes you'll forget to mute one of the strings and they'll end up ringing out, and then you have to hit the retake button. But even if you're not recording it, you want to be able to observe the rests as a pedagogical study, as an etude. So let's cover that. So the first one, we can just loop, right? That one's fairly easy because we can just release the left-hand fingers. You lift your fingers and release the pressure, but you keep your fingers on the string so they don't ring. So that one's fairly easy. The next one, if I don't mute, then this open B string rings out, but there's a rest there. So there's lots of different ways to accomplish this. I've been doing kind of like a little hinge bar to cover mainly the second string because I have to play the G so quickly afterwards that I find trying to mute all the strings will sometimes mute my G. So I just do a little cover up of the E and B string, so the top two strings, just mute, mute, mute. When I first started doing it, I was actually just touching the string with my first finger, so that's an option as well. But you know what? You start entering into micromanagement territory then when you're trying to be very precise with what string you're muting. In the end, as I picked up the speed and tempo, I found that the little hinge bar here, just like muting it with this part of the finger here, was a little bit more natural feeling to my hand, and it wasn't so precise and micromanaging. The other thing is it's not supposed to be a staccato, so you want to make sure it gets a little bit of sustain, a little bit of scoop in the sound. So once you've practiced the figure on its own like that, you can start putting it together. This one always gets me because the open E string, but you're playing a C right before it, so you have to do like a little pivot bar, but you don't actually barre, of course. You just touch the string. And you can't really do it in the right hand because the right hand is so activated all the time. You'd be doing a serious micromanagement activity in the right hand. I do sometimes put my thumb back on the lower strings to help with the muting. So feel free to put your right hand thumb back down, but micromanaging the upper strings with your fingers is a little bit tricky. So again, and it won't be a perfect mute. There's some sympathetic resonance from other strings that does happen, but you just want to make sure that you mute the strings that you actually plucked. And then in bar 4, he actually does clearly write to sustain the notes. But then we're back to the muting in bar 5. Be careful there too. So I'm doing that little hinge bar there. Open E string, make sure you fold over. And then repeated material. And then you're sustaining all through here. Bar 17, he mixes it up a little bit. So suddenly you're muting some notes, but not others. So you have to just make sure you're watching really carefully. Or the score, that is. So I play this with I and M, followed by 2 thumb strokes. And it's mute, mute, hold the upper note. Mute, 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 hold, mute, sustain. Sustain. You're pretty much sustaining all the way through here now. Why is it a single note there? I'm not sure. And then you return to the beginning. So it's a really great etude for control of the texture and for observing rests and muting strings. And the contrast between the sustained sections and the non-sustained sections are very obvious. So it's a really good etude in that sense because you want maximum separation. Clear muting, clear sustain. And if you study that, it can serve you very well in other pieces.